Hello you guys, it's Grace and today I'm going to be doing my summer 2022 reading wrap-up. Let's jump into it. So the first book I finished this summer was The Red Scrolls of Magic by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy it, and this one just felt more like a filler story than an actual novel that I was used to coming from her. But I did love getting a little bit more of Magnus and Alec. Next up was To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. This was an audiobook that I listened to. This book was so long and I could not stay engaged. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. So this is what I said. I can't decide if my semi-bored feeling at the end of this book came from my distraction with audiobooks or if it was just such a long book with not a lot of unique plot twists. There was a budding romance throughout that I loved, but the ending was a bit of a letdown. There were also a few inconsistencies, like the shipmind Grigorovich being called Greg, but only for the last 200 pages or so. The science was interesting and I really did enjoy a majority of the characters, but as a whole, this wasn't my favorite thing I've ever read. I wouldn't have probably finished it if I picked up the physical copy because as background noise, it was fine, but I wouldn't have probably spent the time reading all almost 900 pages. Next up was Instructions for Dancing by Nicola Yoon. This was another audiobook I listened to. I gave it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. I loved this one. It was so cute. Evie feels let down by her father when she learns he cheated on her mom, and Evie decides she no longer believes in love. It was lovely and adorable to see her fight her negative emotions when she meets X, a steamy dance partner. Plot twist though, Evie can see how relationships will end when she sees people kiss. It was a super interesting element that added some fun conflict. Next up, I read My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Frederick Backman. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. If you're looking for a book to hit you right in the feels, this one will probably do it for you. I loved the exploration of Elsa and Granny's relationship and the coinciding grief that came with Granny's death at the beginning. It's not a spoiler. I think it was also interesting to think about how our views of people can be different from how the person truly is, and that sometimes their exterior is just a front for self-preservation. I loved the magical feel of the land of Almost Awake and the ways we could slowly piece together the relationship with real life. I could relate so much to Elsa, being a somewhat different kid myself and always loving stories and grammar. I cried several times while reading this one. It was pretty heart-wrenching at times. Next up, I read All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater. I surprisingly gave this a 1 out of 5 stars. I usually love Maggie Stiefvater's writing, but for some reason I just really couldn't find it in me to care about this one. The characters were kind of boring, they were a little flat, and honestly, I couldn't even tell you what the plot was supposed to be about. Next up, we have It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This is another audiobook I listened to. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I could not put it down. I was just so invested in the story. There are definitely some pretty intense trigger warnings, so definitely check those out. But there was also a lot of great humor. Loved Atlas, who was like her friend slash first boyfriend. Loved how just sweet and genuine he was. Ryle was also, he's the love interest, was also very swoon worthy at the beginning, and the author did a really great job of helping the reader understand why it was so hard for Lily to come to terms with some of the things that he did. Also 10 out of 10 steamy scenes. Chef's kiss. We have The Hate You Give, another audiobook by Angie Thomas. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. This was one of those books that I thought was extremely important to read and forced me to think about topics from a new perspective, which is always a great thing when you're reading a book. That being said, I had already watched the movie, so it felt a little bit like a reread without actually being one. Next up, I read or listened to the audiobook of Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer, and I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was enjoyable. There were certain points that had me laughing. So while it was nostalgic and quite fun to get back into the Twilight Saga, this book was kind of painful to get through. I get that we were meant to understand Edward's angst and uncertainty regarding his relationship with Bella, but it did get a little repetitive. I also think my taste in relationships has changed over the years because the insta-love and gaslighting just didn't quite do it for me this time. Overall though, I would say it was fun to get back into. So this book is essentially Twilight from Edward's perspective. The next book I read was Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. There were many fascinating points about society and human nature that this book made, but as a whole, I was kind of ready to be done. I thought it was interesting to see the group of boys slowly devolve into a group of like savages as they're described. It was an interesting read though, and I felt like it was necessary considering it's like a classic that a lot of people have read. Next up is These Violent Delights, another audiobook by Chloe Gong. I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This book is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, and I really enjoyed the Roma and Juliet love story after so many years apart, like being friends and having a relationship prior and then coming back and kind of getting back into that, and then exploring the like family feud kind of vibe, same as Romeo and Juliet. Next book is The Iron Trial by Holly Black and Cassandra Clare. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. It's been a little while since I had read a middle grade novel, and I really enjoyed it, honestly. It made me feel a little bit nostalgic. This book felt like a mix between Harry Potter and Percy Jackson to me. The characters were super lovable, the magic system was really interesting. There were a couple points that it really slowed down, and I just wanted the pace to like ramp up and draw my attention back. Now we're moving into like my favorite books of the year. Well, some of them. Like, I read a lot of really good books in August. First off, we have Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. There were a lot of really amazing points in this book. I heard someone describe it before I read it as no plot, just vibes, and I would say that's a completely accurate description of this book. It explores friendships and sexual relationships, making the point that human connection is, in the end, what makes life beautiful and what gives our days meaning. So I fell in love with all the characters, except for Felix. Like, he was the one character in this book that I just, like, didn't really care about. Very quickly into reading this book, I felt like they were my friends too. So it's like exploring these people's friendships, but I also felt like I was one of their friends and was like involved in their life, which was just like such a beautiful feeling. I loved this one. Sally Rooney's writing style also is stunning. Next up, we have People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is another book that has kind of taken BookTube and BookTok by storm, and I have heard everyone talking about Emily Henry, so I figured it was time to read one of her books. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. I think it was such a fun book to read at the end of the summer as I'm just kind of like wrapping up all those summer vibes and everything. This book had me giggling and swooning at just about every turn, and I adored both Allie and Poppy. It had kind of like Grumpy Sunshine vibes at times, and then also the friends to lovers trope is something that I am a complete sucker for, so I absolutely loved that. There were also lots of quotes that resonated with me in terms of current relationships. The next book I read or listened to was Our Violent Ends, the second book after These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. This book did feel a little bit repetitive at times, but overall I really liked the humor and a few of the characters. I think Marshall is my absolute favorite character. He's just really wholesome and goofy. Next up, we have The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is another really popular book. Everyone has been talking about Madeline Miller. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this book. The language was gorgeous. I loved the new take on like a classic Greek hero. Telling the story through the eyes of Patroclus made me kind of fall in love with Achilles in a whole new way. So we go into the story knowing how it'll end. If you know anything about like Greek mythology, the way it happened still shook me to my core. The last two books are books I read for my master's program. So the first one is The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You by Maurice Carlos Ruffin. I was not the biggest fan of this one. I'm not a huge short story compilation person, and so far in my program, short story compilations are all we've read. So it's so hard to like get engaged with short story collections, in my opinion. I gave this a 1.5 out of 5 stars, although I will say that this book did a really good job of exploring race, gender, and class in a very meaningful way, so I think it was worth reading, but it just wasn't something that really clicked with me personally, mostly due to the short story format. We have A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. This is another short story compilation, and I think it is the only short story compilation I have ever read that I've liked this much. I adored this book. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. One of the reasons I like this more than other short story compilations is because each of the short stories relate and come back to the same characters. So it felt very much like a novel. There are so many characters, which made it a little bit hard to appreciate all the nuances that the author is bringing in when she brings the narrative back to a certain person. So I honestly think to get the most out of this, I might have to reread it, and then I think my appreciation might even go up more. I really loved the books I read this summer. It was a great few months of reading. I think I accomplished a lot, and I really enjoyed the things I was reading. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Comment below what books you read this summer, maybe what your favorite one was, and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified whenever I upload a new video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!